Someone in the village passed away. But no one expected that on the night of the condolence visit, the coffin would emit such eerie noises. This is a personal experience of mine. The incident happened in October 2014. During the National Day holiday that year, I returned to my hometown in Hunan. The day after I arrived, my grandmother told me that a distant relative had passed away. Since my parents were working out of town, it was just me and my grandmother at home. She was mobility impaired, so she asked me to represent the family and pay respects. I didn't want to go. Condolence visits involve a mix of familiar and unfamiliar relatives, and I'd have to greet everyone as uncle or aunt, which felt awkward. But it wasn't something I could skip. When I arrived at the relative's house, many people were already there offering condolences. One of my uncles was comforting the family. The deceased was my distant great-uncle by kinship. At the door, my two cousins were receiving guests. I heard that my great-uncle had died of nasal cancer and had suffered greatly from the illness. Now that he was gone, many said it was a form of release for him. I greeted my cousins and followed the crowd into the funeral parlor. In our tradition, the deceased are placed in a coffin for relatives and friends to pay their final respects. That was the first time in my memory that I saw a coffin up close. They say that if you see a coffin and write "seeing a coffin brings wealth" in the comments, you'll have good health and great fortune. In the main hall, a large redwood coffin was placed in the center. A brazier burned on the floor, and some relatives were bowing, while others wept bitterly. I followed the mourners into the parlor to view the deceased's remains. Although the deceased was my great-uncle, we didn't have much contact, so there wasn't much emotional attachment. Seeing other relatives crying and mourning, I felt a bit uneasy, but when I approached the coffin and looked inside, I was deeply shaken. It was my first time facing a dead body. My great-uncle's face was covered with a piece of yellow paper, and he was dressed in burial clothes. Large blocks of ice were placed inside the coffin. The yellow paper on his face was soaked with a yellowish liquid. His face was also covered in a layer of liquid, like sweat, flowing down. It was probably due to the hot weather. His body was emitting a stench of decay. The ice was likely there to slow decomposition. I knew it was impolite, but I couldn't help covering my nose and mouth. After paying my respects, I slipped out to the courtyard with a clansman, leaning against a big tree, retching uncontrollably. The clansman was named Dapeng, closer in blood to the deceased's family. We used to play together as kids. He patted my back and asked how I was feeling. I told him about the stench in the parlor, how it was so nauseating. Dapeng didn't react as strongly as I did. He said that's just how it is in our area. If the body isn't kept for 3 days before burial, people will gossip, and it's considered unfilial. I've never liked these tedious traditional customs. In such hot weather, leaving a body like that would surely lead to rot and maggots. No amount of ice would help. Seeing I was fine, Dapeng headed back, reminding me to stay and help out. It's another custom in our area. When a relative passes, the younger generation helps with chores. Since there were many relatives to receive, tasks like serving tea and water were unavoidable. My grandmother had also instructed me to stay and help, so I reluctantly followed Dapeng back, running around and keeping busy. That evening, while I was tidying chairs, my two cousins ran out of the parlor, covering their noses with their sleeves. It seemed they couldn't stand the stench either. As they walked out, they discussed how the body couldn't stay like that for 3 days, and that they needed to find a solution. After they left, I faintly heard a dripping sound from the parlor. Drip, drip, like water. I turned to look. The lighting in the parlor was dim, but I could still see liquid seeping from the coffin seams. It was a sticky pale yellow fluid, likely from the melting ice inside the coffin, leaking through the gaps. The floor was already pooling with liquid, and I could faintly see maggots wriggling in it. I quickly looked away, forced myself to finish helping, and headed home, feeling nauseated the whole way. The stench of decay seemed to cling to me. On the way home, let me recommend something fun. If you're introverted, stay home a lot, and want to find a sweet girlfriend, try the Chin Show app. It has innocent schoolgirls, elegant ladies, and clingy Lolitas, whatever type you're looking for. Just the other day, I came across a university beauty. The app requires real name registration, and even edited photos can't pass the review. All the girls are college educated with proper jobs. If you want to find love, check out the comments and give it a try. Helping out for a day wasn't the end. The next day, my grandmother told me to go back and help. Since many young people in the village were away working, and they were short on hands, with no choice, I dragged myself back to my great-uncle's house. When I arrived, I saw a crowd of villagers whispering at the door. They didn't seem to be there for condolences. I spotted Daping in the crowd and waved him over to ask what was going on. Excited, Daping told me to come watch the spectacle. He said my great-uncle's 2 sons had hired a master to perform a ritual to transfer the stench of the corpse away. I found it laughable. Transferring the smell of a rotting body? I asked Daping what kind of ritual it was, but he didn't explain much. He just pushed through the crowd, pulling me along, shouting, "Make way, we're here to help." We squeezed into the courtyard and reached the parlor. My 2 cousins stood at the entrance covering their noses. The stench in the parlor was even worse than the day before, almost unbearable. A man dressed as a Taoist priest stood by the coffin, with a hen placed on the floor. This must be the master, Daping mentioned. He held a wooden sword in one hand and shook a copper bell in the other, chanting something incomprehensible. The priest, with his sword and bell, stepped in a ritualistic pattern, circling the coffin while chanting. The scene convinced me he was a fraud, a charlatan swindling money, chanting spells to freshen the air? What a joke. After chanting, the priest dipped his wooden sword into the coffin. Curious about his tricks, I stood on tiptoe, leaning on Daping's shoulder, peering into the coffin. The priest used his sword to lift the yellow paper covering my great-uncle's face. As the paper was lifted, I saw my great-uncle's face clearly. It was nauseating. Having died of nasal cancer, his face had a large, festering hole, with maggots wriggling in it. His face was covered in murky, sweat-like liquid. The priest, still chanting, lifted the soaked yellow paper and placed it on the hen. What happened next was beyond my expectations. As the paper touched the hen, pus-like liquid began pouring from under its body. Within moments, the hen started rotting before my eyes. In just a few minutes, a live chicken turned into a maggot-infested pile of decayed flesh. The priest, drenched in sweat from the ritual, instructed my cousins to bury the rotting chicken quickly. He told them to sprinkle glutinous rice on it before burial, and to cover the site with lime afterward. I don't know why he gave those instructions. One of my cousins grabbed a bag, packed up the maggot-ridden chicken, and took it to be buried. After cleaning up the chicken, the priest took some dry straw and burned it around the coffin, creating a thick plume of smoke. When the smoke cleared, the stench in the parlor was miraculously gone. Nothing unusual happened after that. The next day, the coffin was sealed and the burial proceeded as planned. As for how the priest transferred the stench, pus, and maggots to the chicken, it remains a mystery. In the end, I came to 2 conclusions. Either the priest's sleight of hand was so masterful that I couldn't see through it, even up close, or there are things in this world that science and logic cannot explain.